time together.
Thank you.
So what jumped out at you there from what Peter Navarro just told John?
Peter Navarro really wants to talk about hydroxychloroquine still. That's what jumped out at me. Look, I mean, listening to Peter Navarro talk, and he's been an evangelist for the chloroquines for a while in the administration, but it's almost as if he works for somebody who controls the federal government, and the federal government rescinded an emergency use authorization for the chloroquines in conjunction with treating coronavirus. So maybe it'll turn out great, but we don't know, and there clearly needs to be more studies, but I don't think it's because the media isn't talking about it. In terms of what he didn't want to talk about, which was his boss's comments about the Confederate flag yesterday, that also jumped out at me because there is really nobody in the administration who seems to want to take up the mantle of what the president himself said and explain why it is the president thought it was a mistake that NASCAR got rid of the Confederate flag at its events.
It was interesting that he did that. Look, I'm most interested in what the administration is doing about the pandemic right now. And it was surprising to me that Peter Navarro, who I actually I think he cares about masks. I mean, he worked hard to get masks.
Oh, no, and I think he cares about this issue. He was very early on concerned about the no question.
But he's still on the issue of the White House role in promoting mask wearing now. He still doesn't feel like he can get near it because it's still a sensitive issue for the president.
Look, I think that he was trying, and I understand why, not to answer a question that you were asking, which was about the president's role, and it has nothing to do with whether the president gets sick, which is the question that he answered. It has to do with whether the president is modeling for other people by wearing a mask. We have yet to actually see the president wear a mask at an event, which we have seen Vice President Mike Pence do. Maybe we will at some point, but a lot of people are trying to tell the president that he ought to be setting an example on this. He's changed his language somewhat, but he complains that mask wearing, he sees it as some kind of a political act against him. There are widespread mask orders now, or at least widespread mask recommendation, including by Republican mayors, other Republican leaders. So he would be taking a step that others have, and for whatever reason, he just doesn't want to do it.
The president would prefer to talk about the Confederate flag. I mean, he would talk about that. He prefers to tweet about the Confederate flag than about coronavirus. And what's interesting, Maggie, and I think that you've pointed this out on Twitter, is that he feels differently today than he did in 2015.
Yes.
Candidate Donald Trump was ready to retire the Confederate flag in 2015. Let's just play that clip for everyone to remind them.
You're the lone Republican presidential candidate who has yet to weigh in on whether or not you think the Confederate flag should be flying above the State House in South Carolina. Do you think it needs to go?
I think it probably does, and I think they should put it in the museum, let it go, respect whatever it is that you have to respect because it was a point in time, and put it in a museum. But I would take it down, yes.
5 years ago, he thought it should be, he believed it should be relegated to a museum. So why now, 5 years later, is he arguably at a more archaic position?
So he wasn't taking a stand that I think it was not out of nowhere. It was after a horrific shooting at a black church by a white supremacist, and that was when the national conversation was. So that's where the conversation was, and the politically expedient position seemed to be against it, and now he has decided the expedient position is to be for it. Now, whether that is because he truly believes it now, because he is older, because he believes that it's something that, quote unquote, his people, as he puts it, meaning his supporters, want him to say, or is it just something that he's throwing off the cuff? I don't think that he has a deeply held, necessarily, position on the flag based on that clip that we just saw, but I think he is saying something that he considers to be advantageous now. To your point, it's so against the grain of where the majority of the rest of the country is right now, and that's what makes it stand out so much, including some Republicans.
I think that's so important. And Maggie, I've been dying to ask you this question because you are a longtime skeptic of the notion that the president does things to distract, that there's some grand strategy, that there's multidimensional chess here. On this subject, though, I'll ask it, for the 10 millionth time in this administration, it strikes me that he would rather fight a battle about statues, even a losing battle about statues, than talk extensively about the pandemic.
So, John, I just want to clarify what I think. What I think is sometimes he is doing something as a distraction, but not the 99% of the time that people think, such as it's often the equivalent of lighting his arm on fire to distract from his burning leg. These are not well thought out plans. In terms of what you're asking, though, it is absolutely true that the president would rather be talking about issues of race and issues of culture than he would about the coronavirus, because or than he would about police brutality, because neither of those are issues that he is going to do very well on. The coronavirus, if that is the number one issue for voters in the fall, the president's advisors know the president has a big problem. So it's not a surprise to me that that's what he wants to talk about. But again, to the strategy point, is it strategic to support are you helping yourself with suburban voters by supporting the Confederate flag? Is that the distraction, the multidimensional strategic chess that everyone's always talking about? I just have a hard time seeing it.
Well, that's
I agree. You'd rather be talking about that. That doesn't make it strategic.
Yeah, I mean, Maggie, that's why it's so interesting to hear you say, and I think that it's really insightful, that he goes with whatever is politically expedient at the moment. And that's why this one is just hard for people to wrap their head around when you see, as you say, Republicans. I mean, Senator Lindsey Graham doesn't share this position anymore.
No, he does not. I will say, Allison, I wrote about this with my colleague Annie Carney a couple of weeks ago. There are a lot of people around the president who question whether he's actively trying to win anymore. And there are reasons to question that. I think that he would react pretty angrily if somebody said that directly to him. But the reality is he is taking a number of incredibly self-damaging actions. And this is one of them. And by the way, he did this after a weekend where they kept him to a script. And a couple of people close to the president said to me, the speeches that he gave this weekend at Mount Rushmore and then at the White House were not speeches they necessarily would have recommended for him, but at least he stuck to the script. He didn't talk about Confederate statues explicitly. It was a little more tailored, and then he goes right back to it on Twitter on Monday morning. So this is not how somebody who is running a careful, controlled effort behaves.
Yeah, I mean, the tweet undercut everything the speechwriters tried so carefully to do over the weekend, it seems. Maggie, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for being here this morning.